Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1258, I believe. Yeah. We finished the paragraph on 1258. To sum up, Rabbi Rashab, using different verses and sources, is explaining Yizbu'u Atze Havaya from Baruch Nafshi in Tehillim, Psalms 104, with Atze Havaya referring to the trees of Havaya of Gan Eden, as the Zohar says. In the Kabbalistic terms, it's Zoh Ampin of Atzilus, the Atze Havaya, where Havaya radiates. The Yichud of Havaya and Elikim in Gan Eden, Vayita Havaya Elikim, Gan Be'eden, which is higher than Malchus that descends into Biyah, which is called Yichud Havaya Adnai. So here we're talking about Malchus elevating to the same level and stature of Zah. It's still receiving its energy through Zah from the Meichin, but it's on that level that's equal, like a Chosi, like a sister, like a sibling. But Yizbu Atze Havaya means that these trees are sated, are now filled to the point of a savata, that they're not just the minimum. As he explained, not the minimum, they're filled and filled even beyond regular filling. So let's say an example we're using here. So a hungry person eats a meal. You could eat till you're full, and you could eat more than that. Here, obviously, he's not talking about indulgence. He's talking about that the Yizbu is, like he said, with Shabbos on page 1257 that we learned yesterday, that it's that Shabbos is the level Kikedushu. Yizbu v'yisangu mituvecha. He said that this is a Yizbu that, number one, is not connected to Birurim. In the weekdays, the eating is a matter of separating and clarifying and elevating the sparks. On Shabbos, Beirut is Aser. It's not about Birurim. It's more about taking in the pleasure. Like he said, Tzaddik eichel l'seiv nafshei, that Tzaddik eats just to satisfy, to sate the soul. That's the Avodah of Shabbos. So it's higher than Birurim. And this and Sevilla, in the language that we've been discussing, is bringing in a hamshacha, a transmission that's more than just that which the worlds generally get. This is something abundance. And like he said, Yesh Lemer, he said that this abundance, well, before the Yesh Lemer, he said this is the level of where Chachma and Bina are not just radiating into the midas based on their needs, like the mother taking care of the children, but here you're talking about Chachma and Bina standing in a zivug yichud pnimi and receiving, gazing at Arich and receiving from Atik, because Atik is this level of Vesavia. I'm shocking from Ayin the Keser, the Ayin of the level of Keser, is Biyab B'tzachzoches, the delights that you're filled and sated nafshecha, your soul is filled with the delights. The Shin Ayin Naher, the 370 lights and energies from the Metzach of Arich, which comes from the 10 spheres of Atik. Yeah. Good. The 10 spheres of Atik, he said, was the level of Tzachzochis. Zohar Arikiya says that's the 10 spheres of Atik. And then he said, okay, Yichud Pnimi, Yashlemer, that this sphere, this sating, this filling up, is not just filling up whatever was lacking, but it's like wealth, a wealth that's beyond than filling up the tank, so to speak. It's not just daimach sede to fill up what was lacking, but it's still only the energies of Atzilus. But Eisher Ramshal B'chinas Atzmus Ein Sof, which is higher, and therefore it's a Er Chadash. Let me just elaborate a bit on this a bit more in the context of Ayin Beis in general. Remember, the story of Ayin Beis is the story of interface, the interface between existence and the divine. So when God created the world, He created Elam Al Milui Nivra. He created a full world, a complete world. Elu Teldus Hashemayim Ve'aretz, Teldus Mole, which means a complete, perfect world. It was only after Adam and Chava ate from the tree that created a pagam, a wound or an injury, that somewhat severed and created dissonance and severed the connection between the divine purpose and existence. Like we learn in Basar Legani, the Medrash, that after they ate from the Chet Tzadas, before that, Iker Shechina B'Tachtenim Hoysa Basar Legani Legnuni. This was like a bridal chamber of God in this world. The primary Shechina was here on earth, a seamless connection. But the Chet Tzadas caused the Shechina to be concealed, or in the language of the Medrash, to go up from earth to the seventh heaven, and then to the up to the sixth, the next generation that transgressed, and all the way to the first heaven. Well, basically from earth to the seventh. How did you say from earth to the first heaven, all the way to the seventh heaven? And Avram Avinu brought it back from the seventh to the sixth. Yitzchak from the sixth to the fifth. Yaakov from the fifth to the fourth, all the way through Levi, Kohos, Amram, Moshe, the seventh generation. So what you have is Moshe brought back the Shechina, v'shachanti b'seichem, in the Mishkan and through Matan Torah and the building of the Mishkan, that it should be aligned as it was in the beginning of creation. So what do you have in this context of interface? In the beginning, it was connected. Basically, who you are was connected with what you do. Your existence was connected with the mission for which you were created. Adam and Chava wandered away from that. There became this dissonance, and then the return. So you can say there was a world in a perfect state, then there was a severing, or some type of dissonance, and the Aves, the seven generations, brought it back, and what they do, they filled the lack. You could say, Miliach Sarn. That's called Shaddai. That's why God appeared to them, Bekel Shaddai. He didn't reveal himself with Havaya. Because Shaddai, as we learned in volume 1 in Ayin Beis, means die machsere. In other words, it's the divine energy that has a limit. What limit? That it's the divine as it relates to existence. So you could have a divine relating to existence, you could have the divine being concealed from that relationship, and then you're returning it. So you're filling the lack, the void. But you're not necessarily bringing a new oir, chadash, from Atzmos Ein Sof that was higher than the Makar v'Sheiresh ha'Elems. Like you said, Sheiresh Makar ha'Eiris. So that's the Yesh Lemer, that when you say Yizbu, you say V'Savata. And the word Svir here is not just filling and realigning as it was. In other words, fixing the machine and cleaning out the pipes, that the divine should interface with existence, but it's still a divine that relates to existence. But it should go even higher, that Gan Eden itself should reach a higher level, Yizbu, that Gan Eden should be more than what it was in the beginning. To the point that your Mamshech and that's higher than Seder Shtalsha. So the interface with the divine is not just with the divine that relates to existence, Elokim, or Havaya Adnai, but it's Havaya Elokim, Havaya, it's me Havaya, that there's a higher level which ultimately draws from the core essence that's higher than the root from where existence began, even in a perfect state. So you can have the divine connecting to existence and everything is aligned. You can have that severed. Then you can have something that's even higher than the divine that relates to existence, a transcendent energy, which is really the essence of what we've been learning in Avodah, not just that the moichin radiates in the midas in their structure, but you're actually getting new moichin because you're drawing from Arich and Atik in higher levels. So it's not just Zah in its natural state being aligned with godliness, that actually the midas catapult Bina and ultimately Chachma to gaze upon and reach higher levels of Er Chodesh, and even the very midas of the person become transformed. So that's in microcosm, the story that he talked about earlier in Ayin Beis in macrocosm, that it's not just enough in the interface to reconnect with God, reconnect as it was in the beginning of creation, but to actually develop an even deeper relationship that was not there before. And that's only through Avodah, as we'll learn, B'chol Meidecha, we're all-consuming love. But you have to go through stages. You can't get to B'chol Meidecha without B'chol Avavcha, B'chol Nafshecha. B'chol Avavcha, B'chol Nafshecha aligns the person, their heart, and their structure, their faculties toward Elokus. And B'chol Meidecha goes beyond the faculties, emotionally and also cognitively, as we learned earlier. And that in turn draws down this higher energy, which is called Yizbu'u, Svir. So I just wanted to elaborate a bit to understand the context, that it's not We're literally discussing the very essence of the Ayin Beis theme. But now he's using the language. So there's hunger, there's eating and filling the hunger, and then there's svia, where you're getting more than just filling, you're getting something that is called abundance, that is sated. And now he's saying not just sated that you're full, but it's over full, so to speak. But that is chodosh, atzmus ein sof, the chodosh that he's talking about. Now, the next paragraph, which we learned yesterday, we're going to talk about. I'm going to review now this whole paragraph because we learned it, and that is that this is what it means in the pasuk in Mishlei. Nefesh seveya tovus nefas, but nefesh rava kol mar masuk. So he's explaining this verse that will help understand this whole idea. So there's two phrases in this verse. It's contrasting a sated soul, a filled soul, a soul that's completely that feels full, and a hungry soul. So a nefesh seveya tovus, which means trample or disregards or it doesn't care about, but it's really the word means trample, Rashi says. Nefesh refers to honeycomb, that a person who's full, a soul that's full, disregards and tramples on and completely dismisses even honey, sweetness, because it feels full already. The second half, and however, a hungry soul, everything, even something that's bitter is sweet. So here, the full soul is disregarding the sweet. While the hungry soul, the exact opposite. Even something that's bitter is sweet for him. Because when you're hungry, you'll eat anything, basically. So the Rebbe Rashab explains, what does this verse mean? And here you see the word sava, nefesh sava. So you're talking about the savata, yizbu. So he's going to explain this in Aveda, what this means. So the pasuk to Pirish, the pasuk, he says, seems to imply nefesh svei is coin and a negative, a person who's filled with themselves. Not filled with godliness, filled with himself. You're so self-contained in l'umazeh that you don't need anything, and that's that. But then the Rebbe Rashab knows no. But you could also explain that sova means that the nefesh sova in a kedusha dikaway, the kedusha. Now, what is the nefesh sova? That is higher than a hungry soul. Hungering for godliness is a soul that's filled with godliness. And he didn't explain that yet. He only explained the second half. So the next half, which we learned yesterday, is focusing on the second half of the verse. And he's going to go back to the first half once we finish with the thirst, with the hunger. So he explains, what is hunger? What does it mean to be a hungry soul? So he says, neshamas are called hungry ones and thirsty ones. They're hungry and thirsty. The evim gam tzmeim for godliness. A soul its source of life is elokus, is godliness. He doesn't use those expressions, but basically, and a soul can become ravenous because it's searching, it's hungry and thirsty for godliness. So the Rebbe Rashab says there's two levels of this type of hunger. There's a hunger that comes because you're like desperate. Or a person, like he says, echad, a person did not eat. Let's take away the word desperate. I'll use it afterwards. He didn't eat a day or two, so he becomes hungry. The second hunger is actually coming because you've eaten and you've tasted it. It makes you hungry for more. So one is a hunger that's simply just to fill the void, the lack. The other is a hunger that's coming from having an experience of it. As he says, and the more he tastes and eats, the hungrier he gets. Why? And he explains why. Because the food that he eats becomes refined and it's transformed to the dam hu nefesh, becomes energy, becomes his blood and energy, and it makes him stronger. And that's why after he digests it, that only makes him even more stronger, the hunger that develops. Like I mentioned, an athlete or someone who's really using their bodies, they're going to get hungrier because they're really using it. And so as the fuel is absorbed into the body, you feel you need more fuel. So the stronger he gets, the more he needs food. And he said the example, like you see a person, when a person the more persons get accustomed themselves to eat 3 or 4 times, the more the stomach becomes even hungrier. It's like anything, like a muscle. When you exercise a muscle, there's that same thing. It needs more fuel. Okay. And then he said, I'm just summarizing up what we learned, because there were a lot of different details. There are different efanim shenim, begasus v'dakus. There are different levels here of hunger, in crassness and in refined states. And he explains the difference between someone who's accustomed, for instance, to eat simple bread. So his hunger, someone who's used to eating bread is not going to be hungry for delights and all kinds of delectable foods. He'll only be hungry for bread. And someone who's used to sweets and delights, he'll be hungry for those delights. Yeah. So when a person who's intoxicated, someone who's filled, he will be far more expensive. His natural state is expensive food. Like think of a king, think of a person who's in a place that's accustomed to feasting. So that feasting state is constantly, that's his norm in what feeds him, what satisfies him.
That's a little hard to understand.
What's hard to understand? Exactly. If someone who never tasted a sweet is not going to be hungry for sweets. Someone who only eats 1 piece of bread a day, for example, just that's going to be satisfying for him. A person who, the more he eats, the more he's accustomed, the more he hungers for what he is used to. What's the, you never seen this before?
Okay. No, he means in a healthy way.
Healthy, I don't know, he's not talking healthy, just saying, he said gasus or dakus. So it could also be grub away also. The point is, it's all a muscle, just to explain that there can be a hunger that comes because you're hungry because there's lack of food. It can be a hunger because you tasted the food. He's going to now explain in Ruchnis. And the same thing he says now brings Abai b'Megillah Daf Zayin. Kamoikenu b'Ruchnis. Torah is called. Let me finish, and then I'll take questions.
What's Abai? You know what?
I said yes. They have to look it up. I don't know. Okay, Kamoikenu Ruchnis. That Torah nikra mazon. Torah is called food. Mazon, or specifically we call lechem, chulach mulachmi, lechem. Like we know v'seiroscha b'seich meyai, we say the Torah b'seich meyai, like inside the stomach. Now, obviously, food doesn't. You don't digest Torah like a piece of food, but Ruchnius is digest. You digest ideas, you internalize them. It's not just like a garment, like mitzvahs or something external. It goes internal. So Torah is compared to mazon. So now, what is the hunger of the soul? Is that it wants to taste the eichel, the chochmeh lekis, basoga lekis, the Torah. It's hungry for the taste of Torah, the wisdom, the God, divine wisdom in Torah, and understanding, and asoga, both chochmeh and bina, basically. But this only comes because v'hu rak mitzat shatam tuv tam v'das aleki. Because he tasted the tuv tam v'das aleki, the divine taste, the deliciousness of divine wisdom or divine intelligence, das aleki al ken yisei ba neshama keich hatayva. That's why it's stimulated in the soul a keich, a power and a yearning, a desire and a yearning to taste the tam ve'enig aleki k'mei tamu. Taste and see. There's a taste here. In other words, Torah is compared to tam. So just like in a physical, when a person tasted sweets and delights, now they want it. You desire it. Since a person has tasted the delectable, delicious wisdom of Torah, so that's what they desire. This is not a hunger that's coming because the person is just lacking. It's because he's eaten, because he's tasted. It's due to the fact that because of the abundance of consuming Torah day and night, begirsa, b'shenov, like he said, he's giving here all the metaphors of eating, that just as you chew with your teeth, so too you chew over ideas in Torah, because Torah is Lamed Beis Nesifis Chachma. The 32 paths of Chachma correspond to the 32 teeth. And this Torah, just like it is with regular food, you chew it, you digest it, and then it enters into the stomach. That's what it means. It gets absorbed. Digestion means the food gets absorbed within the body. The waste is eliminated. The blood that comes from that food, the nutrients, feed the person. They become absorbed in the very nature, very dam hu nefesh of the person. So too, so too it is with Torah, that Torah gets absorbed. So the more a person eats day and night, the more he wants, the hungrier he is for it. And now we add another point, another part of the example. So just like when it comes to bread, a bread that's underbaked, that's not baked properly, so it can actually cause problems in digestion. It does not get digested in his stomach and doesn't get absorbed in his limbs and or in his body, in his evodim, the limbs or organs of the body. In order to become properly dam hanefesh, it could actually cause actually stomach problems, cause digestive problems if the food is not baked properly or it's not in the right proper. But when it's baked properly, then it's digested and absorbed properly, and it becomes dam. If you eat, let's say, spoiled food, doesn't say spoiled, then it's not going to make you hungrier. It's actually going to make you disgusting. You don't want to eat. So the same thing in ruchnius. So when that happens, then you desire more. The same thing. What's the equivalent in the lechem of Torah? What makes something baked well? He says when the Torah follows, ava kerish be'esh. Look at the beautiful metaphor. How do you bake something? Through fire, right? You have to bake it in an oven. So the same thing in ruchnius. How do you bake Torah that it should be proper? Like the lechem should be properly baked. It has to go through the fire of the love, kirish be'esh, like the fiery flames, the love of God, through contemplating on the greatness of God, which in turn awakens such a fire within the soul. And that fire bakes the Torah. That's what he says afterwards. So there is bonus in Mamala v'Seviv and Kula Kamek Lachashiv. But Oz limud Torah sha'achakach. Then this bread of Torah afterwards nivle be'evrei nafshe v'hoyu lachodim mamash, becomes absorbed in the evrei nafshe. Remember, here we're talking about the nefesh. So just like the body has physical limbs and organs, there's also the nefesh has evarim, evrei nefesh. He explains in chapter 4 in Tanya, which correspond the Ramach Evarim to the Ramach Mitzvahs, Esa. But he was talking about Torah, so it gets absorbed. So the Ava is what produces that the Torah should be well baked. To put it in other Asias, it says in some Amorim, when Torah does not come with Ava, it can become arrogant. You can become arrogant, lag bittel. It's like someone who learns Torah without Baruch B'Torah Tchila, didn't acknowledge God. So it says that, and he'll even forsake Torah. Or more in a more refined way, Ava, Kirish Be'esh, makes that the Torah should be edel. Shouldn't just be, like I said, arrogant or just a Torah that, because you're a smart person, an academic exercise. And he actually refers us to two Maimorim where this is discussed. And he brings the Maimorim, Ki Savoy V'Shavsa and Afu. I believe it's in Likutei Torah. I didn't look it up, but not necessarily Likutei Torah, because when you say Dibur HaMaskal, sometimes it means Maimorim, it could be a Maimor from the Tzemach Tzedek or the Mittler Rebbe. Okay, so here we've established a few things here. That the idea of hunger, we're talking now not hunger where a person is just ravished because they haven't eaten for a few days, so they need to eat something. Here we're talking about a hunger that's coming after eating, after you appreciate what this food is. In this case, you've learned Torah, so now you want more of it. So it's a hunger on a higher level. But it's still, remember, we haven't talked yet about Yizbu, what means being sated. We're still talking about the hunger part. Now, so he doesn't come to the first half of the verse about Besava, he's talking about Nafshe de Eva. But nefesh re'eva kol mar mosik, which is now going to explain. So again, this is a review of yesterday. Since we learned it, we learned a lot yesterday relatively. So I'm just going over it, which can't hurt. The tirav nafshi me'eid lezeh. Okay, 1 second. I'm sorry, that sentence belongs to the previous section. So and therefore, and his nefesh is now, once he has eaten Torah, consumed Torah, digested it properly because it was baked well with the ava kadish be'esh, so then, just as it is with the physical food, then his soul is hungry, very hungry for it, and wants more of it. Now he goes and speaks the difference between primis and chitzenius Torah, which is going to lead us to what he wants to say about this topic. He says that now it's known there's a difference, there's primis and chitzenius of the Torah, and when he says kilei alechem levada yichya adam, so there the pasuk is talking about physical bread, that a person doesn't live on bread alone, but on the divine spark, the moitze pi havaya, the expression from the God, in other words, what the God's utterance that is invested in this food, in this bread. So he's saying the same thing as in Ruchnius. What is the moitze pi havaya Ruchnius? He says, "V'ubchinas haruchnius the Torah, b'chinas primius ha-Torah." It's referring, just like bread has bread and it has a spark, the divine within it, the same thing.
I need a car later, but
In the middle of,
time.
can
No, I just want to go to the store. 20 minutes.
You could go now.
Where's the key?
you please silence? Can everybody put on silence?
Sorry.
Okay. So what is this in Ruchnis? He says, "V'chu b'chinas haruchnis the Torah, b'chinas primis ha-Torah." So when you're learning nigla the Torah, chitzenius ha-Torah, you're learning the mechanics. Let's say lamates malachas. This and this is allowed to be done on Shabbos. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. You're not allowed to be better also. That is the actual laws, the mechanics, and details of mitzvahs. What does primis ha-Torah give you? It gives you the moitze pi havaya. What is the inner meaning of this mitzvah? What is the God's kavanah with it? What is the ruchnius that you're mamshech through it? So just as in bread, there's the divine spark within it. Torah too, there's the Torah, which is the actual laws, and then there's the internal reasons, or the spiritual, the ruchnius, the neshmasa daraisa, the soul of Torah, primis ha-Torah. So now he says, the kashetoyim tuf tam, the primis ha-Torah, when a person tastes of the deliciousness and the good great taste of primis ha-Torah, yir ravin ha-nefesh b'yeser lilmid b'yeser, believe shiur v'hagbala. He will then have a greater hunger to learn without any measure and limit. Like we said before, someone's accustomed to drinking and psuma, meaning intoxication in a good way. He's talking about someone who's full and someone who's accustomed to these delights wants to have more of it. Now the question is, why doesn't he say this just on chitzenius ha-Torah? It's also even chitzenius. You learn Gemara, or you learn Shulchan Aruch, and you also, the more you learn, the more you taste the deliciousness of it. So you can also develop more hunger for that too, not just for primis. I assume the reason is because primis ha-Torah is called taimei Torah. It's the inner taste. You know, you can learn Gemara, and yes, you can have geschmack in the logic and the ideas, but taimei Torah, the inner soul of Torah, really adds this moitze pi havaya. He's not negating saying that when you learn Gemara, you learn nigla, chitzenius ha-Torah, you can't develop hunger. You see that the fact that people do. I think he's just going even deeper because of primis ha-Torah. That's the initial reason. But I think on a deeper level is because he's going to go to a level of birurim, like we're going to learn right now, because Torah is about birur. And so he says like this now. So now he goes back to the verse, the second phrase. Remember the second half of the verse? A hungry soul, kol mar mosuk. Everything that's bitter is sweet. What does that mean? Now in the context of Torah, that is, a person is hungry for Torah. So he says, and this is nefesh reva kol mar mosuk. The nefesh reva l'lachma shel Torah. The soul is hungry for the bread of Torah. Remember, Torah is mazon, is food like bread. So what's the second half mean? So when someone's hungry, kol mar mosuk, hainu b'chinas ha-birurim shebetera, shemahaper gamas amar l'mosuk. So he's interpreting mar mosuk not just in the literal sense that whatever is bitter is sweet for him, that's what Torah does. Torah is the Birurim in Torah. It turns sweet, bitter things into sweet. And he gives the example of when Moshe threw the stick, the rod, into the water and made the water. The Eitz HaChaim of Torah is the rod, is like the tree of life that sweetened the water. Now, most likely what this means is that Torah looks at the world and even things that can be bitter, which means something that may be something that you're not supposed to be doing. Torah gives clarity, and that clarity, the bitter of Torah, turns everything into something that's sweet. Because if the Torah says, do this and don't do this, both of them, you now have clarity, and that clarity is that sweetness. That's one way you could interpret this. You could also say that Torah, by saying something is kosher or treif, kosher or apostle, or something is tamei or ta'ir, it's also clarifying the sweet from the bitter. But there, the thing is, it's not necessarily saying transforming it's not saying that everything that's bitter is sweet. That's why I think he means more what I just interpreted, that it turns everything into sweetness. That's the Birurim of Torah, but he doesn't spill it out very specifically what that means, so I'm just speculating. But then he's going to add something else. Begam, another thing that makes Torah, that turns bitter to sweet, agili the Torah gufa ba b'derech bitter. Not just the Torah clarifies things and says, this is, like we learned earlier, the bitter of halachas. This is kosher, this is not kosher, and so on. We learned that before. Let me just see that a moment. Maybe it'll give me some clarity with this. Where was that piece where you spoke about kosher? Okay, page 1251. So you're talking about how imi, this Torah as it's nigla the Torah, piske hamidis kosher apostle tamei toyer. That's usually called birurim, because nigla is birurim. Eitz hadas is nigla the Torah, das tevara, to know what's right, what's wrong. Eitz hachayim, I think, let me add something here. In the Geras HaKedesh, there's a Geras HaKedesh, Simon Chavav, 26. He explains a Raya Mehemna, a seemingly strange Zohar. It's a famous Raya Mehemna, everybody knows it. The Raya Mehemna says that Nigla the Torah and Primis HaTorah are like Eitz Hadas and Eitz HaChaim. Because Nigla the Torah is like Eitz Hadas Tevara. So the Alter Rebbe asks, what does that mean? It's Torah. Torah doesn't have Tevara. So he says it's the bitter of Tevara. The bitter, the clarity, what is right and what is wrong. That's Nigla the Torah. Eitz HaChaim in Primis HaTorah says less taman le'machlekas le'kushim. You don't find in Primis HaTorah the arguments and counter arguments of clarifying a halachic issue, because Eitz HaChaim is this tree of life. It's Gili Elikus. It's not Elikus as it's struggling to clarify what is right, what is wrong. Is Ruven right? Is Shimon right? In other words, it's mislabish nigla the Torah in arguments that include taina shel sheker. When two people are arguing whether who does this belong to or over money, someone is saying the truth, someone's not saying. So the Torah says, if he's chayiv b'miktzas, for example, he acknowledges half or partially, chayiv b'shvua, he has to take an oath. He has to take an oath. So in other words, you're dealing with the matters of this world and trying to clarify truth from non-truth, kosher from not kosher, etc. In Primis HaTorah, you're not involved in the matters of right and wrong and good and evil. So it's not Tevara. It's Eitz HaChaim. He goes a whole arichas on this. Beautiful piece, unbelievable Geras HaKedesh. He even talks about la'asad lave. When there'll no longer be evil, what will you need to learn Torah? So he says you won't learn Torah in order to clarify right and wrong. Torah then will be yichudim el yenim, to connect more to God. The point is, therefore, that nigla the Torah, speaking about primis echitzenis, that's what just struck me, and that's why I wanted to see what it said there. So in chitzenis HaTorah, which we learned earlier, is actually zah. That's how moichin is involved in zah. What is zah? Midas, like he said, chesed and gvura. Chesed and gvura is kosher, not kosher. That's what he typed clearly on page 1251. He said it also somewhat briefly on page 1248 with Rashbi. So that's Chitzenis HaTorah. What does Pnimis HaTorah do? Pnimis HaTorah is sweetens the whole thing. Because primis atera is about the lakus of this. It's not about what is right, what is wrong. Now, I'm saying it even though he doesn't say it explicitly, but since it's coming after primis chitzenis, it could be that he's introducing primis atera because it's the higher level of moichin. That's not just relates to Zah. He doesn't say it explicitly. That's why I'm being careful, because he does say that Torah is Birurim, the Mahapach Gamas Hamar Lemosik. He doesn't say that the Mahapach is through Primis HaTorah. That's why I go back to what I said before, that even the Chitzenis, even Nigla the Torah, when you're clarifying something, you're turning bitter to sweet. Because if you don't know what's right and what's wrong, that's called bitter. But when you have that clarity, it's called sweet. It's my explanation. He doesn't say it explicitly here. I have to look more into it. But when he gives in the parentheses that the Eitz HaChaim, the Torah, sweetens the bitter, Eitz HaChaim is clearly Primis HaTorah, and Eitz HaDas is Chitzenis HaTorah, the Birurim. So it could be he's hinting to all of this without elaborating, and it's not a contradiction, there's different ways to explain this point. But then he adds that the very Gili of Torah itself, not just that Torah clarifies halacha, Torah itself is a form of birur. Because we learned earlier, as he's going to say in the Ayin Beis, that in Torah we also have the lamatas malachas. There's bishul, there's zereya, v'cheresh, you plant an idea, cheresh, you plow the idea. So besides the fact that the malachas are physical, that things that you do in the field, in volume 2 we learned in this Ayin Beis that in Torah itself there's the process of these malachas within Torah. So because Torah is also the yigiyah, the effort and exertion in Torah is also a process of bir. It's clarifying in the mind, you're struggling, you're exerting yourself. So Torah too is birurim, and that's the idea of mara mosik. You are drawing out the sweet from the bitter. So in other words, when a person is hungry for Torah, he's saying, so here's what I'm going to say. Since it's coming through effort and exertion, which means you're slapshus, you're not from above, you're immersed in it. To clarify the power of Torah, that's why there is capable of saying hunger and thirst. Because you begin without having that clarity, you're now exerting yourself, and as you exert yourself, that causes you, like he said before, when a person works hard and the food gets consumed, that's what causes them to become hungrier. That may be another additional point. But bottom line, you have here Ra'avim Semayin because you're dealing with Birurim, the Birurim, and that causes the Mar. Now in the Pasuk itself, it says Mar Mosik would be because since you're hungry, so even a bitter thing is sweet for you because you just want anything. He doesn't seem to indicate that that's the meaning here. Here, first he said it's a form of transforming Mahapach Gamas Hamar Lemosik, but the truth is it's very limited, sparse words here, and it's hard to really say how is he teaching the pasuk. He does say Mahapach. Is he saying that since a person is exerting, that's why it causes them to be hungry? Since you're hungry, you want more, which is the whole idea that he's talking about here. But how that fits with Mara Mosik, not positive. Is it because, in other words, is he saying that because you're eating, you're studying Torah, so you're eating, so that causes? No, I don't think he means to say that it causes it to be bitter, and then bitter becomes sweet. But definitely talking about hunger here. So I'm not clear about every detail exactly how it fits into the verse, besides the first half that I did explain, both whether it's clarifying things or it's the primis hatera that sweetens the Eitz HaChaim. But at the end of it, the bottom line is that in this part of the verse, there is the concept that Rava, Nafesh Rava, Nefesh Rava, the hungry soul. The hungry soul in the world of Torah, because Torah is lechem of Torah, Muslim, so there's a hunger, but it's not a hunger like he said coming, Eifin Aleph, what he said on top of the page, because of lack of eating. This is, in other words, a person, for example, which says about a Baal Tshuva, that because he was so thirsty for godliness, that's why it's Ava, the Tshuva Ma'ava can be Mahapach. So there, it's because of his absolute desperation. He's so thirsty. Here he's saying it's not coming because your lack of eating, this is coming because you're eating and tasting from Torah. That's causing even more hunger for it. And this is all the level of the Birurim of Torah. He wants to have more. Now you could technically say that maybe mar, bitter, means a form of hunger. And then as you are hungry, then you consume more, so it becomes sweet. But I don't think that's what he's saying here. Okay, that sums up what we learned yesterday, the end of this paragraph.
I think you're right.
And we may even, one minute. There are people in this class, a lot of people. This is all recorded. Many people listen afterwards, and I've been told they want, and let me finish. I will stop and say, let's, at this point, take questions or comments. Since we're not learning one-on-one, I have to do it this way. There's no way around it. There's too many people involved in this learning here. So now, it could be, as I said many times, you learn further, may add clarity as we go back to this paragraph. So I always wait for that as well, because we're not finished, because now he's going to talk about that there's a higher level in Torah, which is called Sveya, where a person is satisfied and sated. Here we're talking about all hunger, a hunger that leads, the eating leads to more hunger. So we're going to learn the next paragraph. And now I shall stop. Anybody want to ask anything?
I just wanted to say that I agree with what you said, that it doesn't mean only that you're turning bitter for good, but the etzam yegia, like you said, this itself is making it stronger.
Okay. Okay. Anybody wants me to clarify anything else? Any other questions or comments? Okay, omnom. So we'll start there from the next paragraph, bottom of page 1258. The pages are all available at ayinbeis.com in PDF form. Omnom. Now, however, by contrast, yesh bebchinas hatera shilamayla ma'birurim legamri. There's in Torah a level that's completely above birurim, meaning to clarify or to separate. Okay. Yeah. She'einin yona levadir. A level in Torah that's completely above this whole issue of clarifying something that's not clear, separating, etc., that we just learned. Because, and this level of Torah is einin yona levadir. That's not his job. That's not the function of Torah. This level of Torah, this higher level. It's not. Its function is not to be mevadir, to clarify things. I'll just to give an example before we go on. For example, when you say in Torah, there's two dimensions. You're learning in order to clarify halacha. You have Reuven and Shimon have an argument. You have a question: is this animal kosher or not? Is something pure or not pure? But then there's a thing called Yagdol Torah v'Yadin. You're learning not to clarify anything. Yagdol Torah v'Yadin, to strengthen and greaten and exalt the grandeur of Torah. You're learning just to demonstrate this is God's wisdom, and that's the point of it. It's not to clarify something. You're not learning necessarily in order to bring a halacha, a bitter halacha. Just a simple example. Another example, what I said before, chitzenius hatera and primus hatera. In chitzenius hatera, there's definitely a part which is halacha. Even though I just explained that chitzenius hatera is also yagdol Torah v'yad. But primus hatera is not about clarifying what's right and what's wrong. That you look in Shulchan Aruch. It's coming to teach us about godliness, or the godliness within what's right and what's wrong, the deep reasons. So let's wait and see how the Rebbe Rashab explains. I just wanted to give a little example so understand that in Torah itself there's levels. The Chen Hagili, and the so too. So besides this is a Torah that's higher than Birurim, and it's Inyan and Einin Yona. Its function, its role is not to clarify. The Chen Hagili ain't a bederach birur. Like we said before, that the Gili of Torah comes in a from a birur that you struggle and exert yourself. You have the Lamates Melachos. So he said, didn't just say that Torah clarifies things. The very Torah, the very learning, he said, now he's saying, now we're talking about a level that the Gili also doesn't come in a derech birur. It's not like you're learning in order to clarify things. Remember, he said that when you come to in a form of birur, it's in a form of islapsus. That's what birur is. Let me explain. Whenever you talk about birurim, which means you're coming into a place to clarify, birur means clarity. Birur also means to separate the kedusha from the knot, the husk, the fruit from the husk, the fruit from the peel. That's called birurim. So Chassidus has a language that whenever there's birurim, the mevarer has to be mislabish b'levushe hamizbarer. The one that's coming to do this work can't do it from above. Birurim don't happen from above, from a higher oir. You have to go there. That's why the language when we're in Golus, that the Lo Higla Yisrael, it says, Zdok Osa Kodesh Baruch Hu, Shepizram Beina Umes. That God did a tzedakah to the Jews, he separated them among the nations. Or Lo Higla Yisrael El Lahesif Lehem Gedim. That the Jews were exiled only to find Gedim, converts. What does this mean? Since when is Golus a tzedakah? So Chassidus explains, Maimer Pizreine, the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe brings it in different Maimorim. The idea is that we come into Golus in order for Birurim. You can't do it from above, so you have to go into Golus, into a neshama, in a guf, that's in general, and in a place, and we speak the language of the place. The Alter Rebbe explains this in Torah Mishpatim, and we get involved. Like the Jews went into Mitzrayim, or all the other Golias. So we go in there, or even in this week's Parsha, Yaakov dresses in the garments of Esau. What's the need for that? Because that's Birurim. So Birurim is always islapsus. You have to enter into it. So when you learn Gemara or Shulchan Aruch, and you're clarifying something, you have to get into it. You can't just speak about it from above. You have to get into the nitty gritty. Sit by a din Torah and hear arguments back and forth. You can't just sit on a mountain and stream different halachic rulings. You have to be involved and immersed in it. So that's Torah, that's in the form of birurim. Now he's talking about Hagili Eina B'derech Birur, V'hu She'eina Bo B'chinas Islapsus Klal. We're talking about Torah not as it comes manifest in Islapsus, in whatever it is, it's being mislabish. We'll soon understand what he's saying. U'kameshin is bar l'il be'inyan haman. Like we learned earlier about the man. What's the difference between lechem and hashemayim, lechem and haaretz? First of all, lechem and haaretz, several things. First of all, to produce bread from the ground, you have to work. Chedesh, v'zereya, v'chedesh. You have to plant and sow seeds. You have to plow the field. You have to water it. I mean, there's a whole process. You have to harvest it. Lechem and hashemayim, no birur, no work. You don't have to work it. You don't have to work the field. It came down from heaven every morning. No effort at all. You don't even have to prepare it. Lechem and haaretz, you take the grain, you have to turn it into flour, and then bake the flour, mix it with water, bake it into bread, into challah. Lechem and hashemayim is all ready. Second thing, lechem and haaretz has to go through digestive system. You eat it, there's waste that has to be eliminated, the nutrients that are absorbed. Lechem and hashemayim, it says, it completely absorbed the ivarim, there was no waste, no pselos. So man, we learned, is like primis atera compared to lechem and haaretz, nigla atera. So in Torah, there's a level, he didn't say yet primis atera here, he said it before, but not yet here. So there's a level in Torah that is higher than Birurim, like the man. Like he spoke about Shabbos. This is a level of Torah where the oil radiates as is. It doesn't come in islapsus, and it comes down without effort and exertion. This Torah is coming down as a gift from above. In the parentheses, he adds what level it is. He says, "Vihi hamadrege el yena b'taimei Torah." Remember, we spoke before taimei. I said the word tam. Taimei Torah refers to the inner meaning of Torah. Taimei Torah, the reasons or the taste, the inner taste of Torah. So this is a higher level in time Torah, she is Galil Asid, which will be revealed in the future. B'bchinas Einig habilti murgish, an unsensing, unconscious, or a pleasure that is not sensed and not felt. Basically, a super conscious pleasure, like we learned about earlier in volume 2 about the man. So there's Einig murgish, a pleasure you feel. It's also a high level, like we're learning about the pleasures of different foods and so on. Then there's Einig bilti murgish, that is not conscious, just you're there. It's like in the zone, you're just experiencing being part of it. So it's a deep pleasure, but you're not even aware of it because there's no one to be aware. You're completely absorbed in the experience. And a person who reaches this level today, meaning not waiting for it, this is the inyan where you say, Elamcha, your world, you shall see in your lifetime. Elamcha is referring to Elam Haba. In this case, he's talking also of this higher level. So he says there is a person who has this experience now. That's the level of Elamcha Tira B'chayecha, Ukamay Ha'ovis, like the patriarchs, Shehitimon Me'ein Elam Haba, who they tasted from, they were given a taste from, like Me'ein, similar to the future, the world to come. So this is the level that we're referring to. I'm going to read one more line, then we'll stop. This is referring to a level where the custom there is not a place where they eat. It's a place that's beyond food, beyond eating. It's not in a place like when Moshe went up on Har Sinai. That's considered. It's not a place where they eat and drink. So Hainu, it's not in the form of achila, of food, and birur, which is all part of food processing, whether it's making the food or consuming or digesting the food. And therefore, in this level, in this level, you can't speak about hunger or thirst. And then he says, I went on the line, next line, just in the sentence, top of 1259, as it says in Tanya, end of Perek Mem, which I want to look up, which I'll do before next class. I'm going to stop here, because now he's going to go back to the first half of the verse, Nefesh Seveya, the Nefesh that is filled, that's sated, what that part of the verse in Mishlei means. Okay, so he's introduced now another level of Torah that's higher than hunger and thirst, higher than Birurim, higher than Achila, something that's beyond the way we appreciate something and how we absorb and digest. So I'm going to stop here. I'll take a question or two, but I do have to, I have a meeting, important meeting I have to go to. So any questions? Okay, so I'm stopping at the top of page, literally the first words on top